Okay. We should start to see everyone jumping in here. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour once again. Great to see you. Got a lot of familiar faces, some new ones, as always. And we're ready to have some fun today. I see, hey, Jeannie Grassi. See you waving there. I feel like we haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. And I see Carl Lieberman's jumping in, and Wayne's coming from a different location he typically does. Wayne looks like he's in his living room / piano showroom. Pretty cool space that we did a little tour of that when we had a master class with him. All right. Well, I'll try to get us rolling here pretty quick with an intro to the session, and then we can get into the program for today. So just give me a moment and I'll pull up the intro. We'll roll that out and we'll dive right in. So welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world, including manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. Let me just double check if anybody, there's other people to be let in here, so I'll make sure they get let in. And I'll introduce today's guest. Today's guest is Douglas Gregg. He's a retired veterinary pathologist and electron microscopist from Plum Island Animal Disease Center, where he worked on exotic viral diseases for 28 years. So why is he here? Well, on the sideline, Douglas has been working on pipe organs and pianos and has been restoring his mother's collected antiques for 30 years. He got his initial piano training from one of Steinway's top technicians, where he also represented Steinway on the East End of Long Island for warranty work and tunes for Steinway artists. His current business, which has about 1,500 customers in Long Island, is a solo piano business where he moves, tunes, repairs, and rebuilds pianos. And I'll bring him on the spotlight, and I'll bring out myself as well. And we'll say hi to Doug, and then we'll jump into his presentation. How you doing today, Doug? Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
I've been for a while, and it's good to be on.
Yeah. Doug's the piano doctor. And yeah, we have. What's that?
That's legitimate.
Yeah, it's legitimate. He's got the doctorate. Yeah, he can yield that that accolade. So how do you want to do this, Doug? You want to just jump into the presentation? You want to get a little bit of a preface? How do you prefer we roll along here?
Just a quick little preface.
Sure.
I'm basically a scientist. Okay, so I came into this field kind of in the back door. I got involved first with pipe organist in the church, and he wanted to rebuild and restore and expand the pipe organ, and he needed help, so I started doing it. And I then when he retired at about 90, we got a concert pianist who wanted the piano in the church restored, and an old Kranick Bach, and had my brother-in-law come out, who worked for Steinway, who still works for Steinway in the showroom, and he showed me how to rebuild the grand piano, and then he showed me how to rebuild a upright piano for my daughter, and kind of went from there. But I come at it as a diagnostician, as a scientist, as a researcher, and also an educator. I've done some teaching in the guild meetings. So yeah, so I basically look at a problem and dissect it, and try to come up with an improvement, and try to perfect that solution. So I'll be presenting some novel ideas techniques that others probably don't use. Might be controversial, but so be it. Anyway, the first part is going to be about hammer voicing. The second part is going to be about things that you can do to improve the look of the piano in the house, not the shop. That's subject for another day. So the goal with piano voicing, in my mind, is to get the greatest dynamic range out of whatever piano you're working on. That can be a little challenging with some of the Asian pianos, particularly. They have hard hammers, so do Baldwin's. Some of the hardest that I found is Kawai, but they can all be improved substantially. And I'll show you how, and you can do it in just a couple of minutes. So I'll show you how you do that at the end of this. But first, a little about hammers. It's pretty hard to come up with a concert quality voicing if you don't start out with a good hammer. So many pianos come with pretty hard hammers, especially the Asian ones. So if you have good hammers that are soft pressed, it's pretty easy to brighten them if you need to. So I'm not going to talk much about brightening, but more about good quality of hammers and how to soften them. So yeah, there's really no substitute for a high quality hammer. And an example, just in the last couple of days, I delivered a Mason and Hamlin action that had some really cheap hammers put in it about 5 years ago. The owner was quite unhappy with the sound. It was bright. He knew what he was doing. He wanted it voiced, and I did some voicing on it. But I told him, look, these hammers just aren't good enough quality for this piano. So I put in some Ronson Weichert hammers in it, and he called me back the next day just glowing and thrilled. And I hardly had to do anything to those hammers when I put them in. I literally didn't have to do anything. So a really good hammer makes a lot of difference. If you're putting a new hammer in that takes 100, like some people say, 100 stabs with a needle before they're appropriate, you probably chose the wrong hammer for that piano. Or wrong hammer, period, as in my personal opinion. The hardness of the hammer is a result of not only manufacturing, but the quality of the wool. And I'll show you some examples in a minute, but the springiness is really important for the hammer. The hammer strikes the string, and as it releases from the string, it has to spring back and start a vibration in that string, and that vibration goes down the string. So it's the release of the hammer that really makes the sound, not the attack. It's the release. And if the hammer doesn't compress significantly on forte, especially, it's not going to have much spring. It's just going to be a clang. It's going to be a hard strike, and that's not what you want. You want a big sound on a forte. I like to see a rather metallic forte when you really pound it, and yet still have a soft, sweet pianissimo and everything in between. But you need a pretty resilient hammer to get that. So let's see. Follow on a little bit. What I tell people some people don't understand voicing at all. And some technicians don't want to get involved in voicing, and understand why. But when I find a piano with hard hammers, which is more times than not, I'll tell them, look, you have forte and you have forte light. When you play softer, it's the same voice, it's just softer. And if they don't they may get that. If they don't get it, then you have to somehow demonstrate to them what that means, and how you can change it. And I always had a problem with that, because if you start voicing a couple of hammers in the middle of the piano, you're pretty well committed. So I tried not to do that. In one of the previous shows, there was a suggestion which I liked very much, which was to just drape us a well-worn handkerchief over an octave of hammers and play that, and it'll give you an impression of what it'd be like if you soften the hammers, and you'll hear the pianissimo, and then you can take the handkerchief away and you'll hear what it sounds like now. So that usually convinces people that they could have a much better sounding piano. So again, there's so far you can go, because it's the quality of the hammer that makes a difference. And a lot of rebuilders, for some reason, don't get that. And at least half the time when I'm looking at a high quality piano, Steinway, for instance, that's been rebuilt, I'll find cheap hammers in it, cheap supply house hammers, no name. And they're hard, and they're almost impossible to voice well for that piano. So a little about what makes a good hammer, and they might look the same, but there's huge differences. My personal favorite is the Weichert felt, and there's I was at a presentation by Ray Negron from Ronson, and he described how this felt was rediscovered. It was a felt maker in East Germany, the old East Germany, that was still in business since the 30s, and they still had the protocols for how they used to make the hammers in the golden age, which was like a lost art. And he's using it again. He's using that wool's being made there in that same factory today, and he makes hammers from that wool. And he starts out with a 3 to 4 inch fleece, and the only way you can get a 3 to 4 inch fleece from a sheep is to grow that wool for 2 years. And they can't experience a winter, because in the winter the wool doesn't grow much, and when it grows again in the spring, there'll be a weak spot between the previous year and the new year. So you can go to the first picture of a fleece like
before we get to that, one question popped up, so I'll let you know.
Sure.
Looks like who asked this? Judy asks, what hammer do you recommend? And you can get into this later if you want, but for an 1800-ish good upright.
Like the one behind me.
It seems like that's maybe an inspired question, probably, maybe.
Yeah, well, I use almost exclusively, I use Ronson hammers. So it's either Wurtzen, which is a little bit brighter than the Weichert felt. Then that depends on taste. Neither one of them need much voicing. They come out quite good. The Wurtzen is the one that Ronson company has been making for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. The Weichert maybe for half that. The Weichert's pretty soft hammer. If you like a soft tone, very wide range, I like the Weichert felt. Yeah, cool. I put that into Yamahas and their Grands, and it sounds great. I use the Wurtzen, which is slightly brighter in the Yamaha than the Weichert, but I think the Weichert could also be a choice if that's a kind of voice you like. And you can always voice them up a little bit. And I often do with the Weichert felt, that just to give it a little more boom in the bass. So the first picture I have is a picture of 4-inch thick fleece of wool. And Ray said he gets sheep wool this thick by special producers in northern Texas, where they don't experience a winter, and they'll grow the wool for 2 years. And this is merino wool. And the next picture shows the difference between merino wool and a lot of other wool, like Australian wool, that usually ends up in the Asian hammers. Notice the middle one, that's New Zealand merino. It's about a third the diameter of traditional wool. So that gives a much finer, springier wool. This is the kind of wool that you want for a $3,000 suit that's being made for you. If you choose a cheap wool for that suit, it's going to be stiff and itchy. And the same applies to hammer making. You want something that's soft and resilient, not something that's hard and also short fiber. If you don't get 4-inch fibers, then you're working with about 1.5 inch fiber, and it takes a lot more felting to produce a hammer, and that means a harder hammer usually. The next one, the springiness of wool comes from the natural crimp in the wool. This is a picture of some merino wool, and you can see it almost looks like a folded spring. So, and then you take that wool. This is a hammer. This is actual electron micrograph of a good hammer wool that's been made from fairly long fibers and nice and parallel. You're looking at them on end, but they're all pretty nicely laid out in parallel. So they retain their springiness. If you don't have that, if you have short, stiff fibers and it has to be felted more and tangled more, basically, you end up with hammers with like this that have fibers going in every which way, and they're going to have to pack them harder, press them harder, possibly even add some glue to the wool to make it all stay together well. There's a big difference between a cheap hammer like might come out of China at this time, might look like this, and a quality hammer which has much longer fibers. If you have long fibers, it's much easier to pack it together and have it stay together, because they're just so much longer. You don't need to tangle them so much. This demonstrates that typical wool, not from, say, a climate like North Texas, but from a temperate area that has been pulled. It's 3 to 4 inches long, but if you pull on either end, it breaks right in the middle, and that's the break point from the winter growth. So that can create a problem if you were to make hammers from that kind of wool. There may be weak spots in the wool. And the hammers may end up with soft spots. In worst case scenario, if that ends up at the strike point, could have a problem with it deteriorating rather quickly. So you want to choose for these really good hammers. They're producing or using wool that's really premium. It's the kind you make a suit out of. This is some wool that's rather typical, low quality, maybe 1 inch long. Sometimes some of the cheap wool on the market comes from sheep that have died or been sent to market, and they shear the wool off after they're dead. They can be muddy, they can be dirty, full of organic material. So that wool needs a lot of processing, a lot of washing and bleaching and combing out, and not anywhere near like that first picture that I showed you, which is nice white fleece from a clean shearing. So this is pretty poor quality wool, and if you make hammers out of that, it's going to be a pretty poor quality sounding hammer because it's so short and it's going to be over processed. So one of the things that helps to keep from having to process the wool quite so much is what keeps the hammer together without a lot of over felting is the scales on the wool. You can see this on the electromicrograph. The scaling is shingling. It makes it stick together pretty well. The other thing that helps make it stick together, which is very important, is lanolin, which I'm not showing in the picture, but when the lanolin helps keep a good quality wool together. What's the purpose of lanolin in the wool? Why would you leave it in? Well, it gives water resistance, and in an Irish sweater, that's an important feature for fishermen. But more importantly, for our purposes, lanolin gives it some lubrication, so the fibers can move, and that gives you some of the springiness, the softness, because they're not all tangled tightly together. If they're like this in the parallel format, they'll slide back and forth. So when a hammer strikes the string, they'll slide and compress and then release. So that's really what you want. On the next one, it used to be in the golden age of piano making, they made some really good hammers, and you'd see this frequently. I know hammers from the 20s and 30s that are still in pianos, and you notice that I've cut one of these old hammers down the middle, and they're yellow, but they're yellow all the way through, and that's because they didn't process the wool back then much. You'll even find bits of organic material in old hammers if you really examine them carefully. So this is pretty much raw wool that's been made into hammers. Today, most hammers, until rather recently anyway, have been heavily processed, very well bleached, white, and generally hard, especially the Asian hard pressed hammers. They don't respond near as well on a piano as these old hammers that used to do. So the Weichert hammer is processed pretty much the same way it was back in the 30s. They start with about literally 3 feet of wool compressed down to about less than an inch of wool, using nothing but pressure, steam, and water, and end up with really high quality felt. So let's move on.
Quick question from Nancy. Would residual lanolin affect strings and the corrosion of them?
No, I don't think so. I think lanolin is pretty neutral. So I don't think it affected causing corrosion. She's worried about. I don't think they cause corrosion. I've never seen that in old pianos. Let's go on. What do you do with the hammers that you're given? Okay. Well, you can't always change the hammers unless it's a concert piano or somebody's really serious. So I started out trying just about every voicing method there was. Obviously, needling. What does needling do? Basically, it introduces air. into the fibers, and in the worst case scenario, it breaks fibers. So it's a lot of work. It's not necessarily permanent, because if it's just introducing air, you get more compression. With playing there, it's going to need voicing again. So and it takes time. Then I moved on to steaming, which works really quite well. I use a pressure steamer like this one. And it gives you pretty good result. It does tend to swell the hammer quite a bit. And you might have to reshape the strike point to match the strings again after using a steamer. But one time I was, before I say that, you're introducing steam, you're introducing water. Some people just use water. Some people wet hammers with alcohol, water, acetones. I've heard people using vodka. All of those things will soften a hammer, but will evaporate eventually. So could you put the lanolin back in a hammer where the lanolin has been extracted? It's an interesting idea, but one, lanolin is about the consistency of lard. So you'd have to heat it and melt it to put it in, and then if you put in too much, it'll probably get moldy over a long period of time. So it doesn't seem like a good choice. One time when I was working on an old spinet and I didn't have the steamer with me, and I had a particularly obnoxious note. I had a can of Ballistol, which I started using mainly for squeaks and things like that. This is the Ballistol. It's a gun oil that was produced by the Germans in World War I for guns, and it was has been used for all sorts of things in the recent past. Right next to it, there's some balsam fir oil. Some people object to the smell of the Ballistol, and you can use a little bit of that balsam fir oil to a drop or two on each hammer, and it'll make it smell like a Christmas tree. But I tried taking some of this Ballistol and giving it a shot to the hammer. What the heck? I had nothing to lose. I was figuring if you can add alcohol or you can add vodka or whatever, let's see what Ballistol does. It worked very well. In fact, it worked so well, I did the rest of the hammers. And then for several years on pianos in my shop, I experimented with voicing with Ballistol. Didn't use it on clients' pianos right away until I was comfortable with it. But now I use a great deal of it. And I voice more than half of the pianos that I tune. Sometimes I don't even charge for it because it isn't that expensive and it doesn't take much time. More recently, I do charge for it because it's a really high value operation. Makes a big change. So one of the advantages of Ballistol over anything else is that it doesn't evaporate. It doesn't grow molds or bacteria. In fact, it's actually antiseptic. Was used in World War II in wounds, or World War I in wounds in the trenches, because it's got a low pH, or I'm sorry, a high pH, and that's bacteriostatic. So it's still used in veterinary medicine in Germany to control infections like in foot rot in a horse. And it's safe to use on wool, leather, metal, wood, anything in the piano, so it's completely safe.
Let's bring up a couple questions and comments here. Sure. Let's see here. Let's go back to Carl. A few minutes ago asked if steaming hammers destroys the lanolin. Do you know if that affects the?
No, I don't think it destroys it. In fact, it probably rejuvenates it a little bit by softening the lanolin. But so does Ballistol, and Ballistol is more permanent. So it actually introduces a rather thin oil that has a lot of lubricity. So it soaks in all the way to the core. So I like to use that.
And then Judy asked, does the Ballistol bother the strings in any way?
It will take some of the corrosion off of the bass strings, and it may transfer a greenish spot onto the strike point. It doesn't have any effect on the hammer, and I know this from at least 15 years experience with it. But you will see the strike point marked, which I don't think is a big problem. Hardly anybody except another technician is going to notice that. It's similar to when you put a piece of carbon paper in between the string and the hammer to see where it's striking. It's somewhat of an advantage actually for aligning the hammer later.
And then Carl comes back and asks, and I think you might answer this later, so we can skip if necessary, but he says, where do you steam and where do you spray the Ballistol?
In both cases, I use a strike point. So,
Okay.
yeah,
and
because
and then,
in both cases they soak in, so it doesn't much matter where you apply it.
and then Larry asks how you apply it, which I think
We'll show
is
you in a
similar.
bit.
Yeah, we'll show you in a bit.
So over the years, I've developed what I call a 5-minute voicing. Actually, it's about a 2-minute voicing, but if you count taking the front off the piano, it's a 5-minute voicing. But you can use this Ballistol to proportionately in each hammer, being a little more in the bass hammers, the bigger hammers, and very little way up in the upper treble. So I call it a 4-3-2-1 voicing. 4 times as much in the bass section, 3 times as much in the tenor section, 2 times up in the treble section, and the high treble gets one part. So I do that in 4 passes, passing one less section with each pass. So first pass, they all get a shot. The second pass, 3 sections get a shot, and so on, till the 4th pass, only the bass gets 4 shots. So it takes 2 to 3 ounces for a pretty decent hammer. Even a brand new Steinway D, I would use about 2 to 3 ounces and voice that, and it gives it some bloom that you don't get out of those even good hammers. For really hard hammers, I've used as much as 6 ounces to do the full set. And the good part about it is you can do this without fear of overdosing it. You cannot overdose the hammers, essentially. And they come out completely even, which is the big fear with a lot of technicians. They don't want to start voicing because they're afraid they can't get it even. And that happened to me the first time I started voicing. I thought, oh my God, after the first couple needle punctures, I thought, boy, I really messed this up. I'm going to have to figure out how to get it even. So, but Ballistol is completely fearless and foolproof. So you want to show the video at this point? And I apologize.
Yeah, we could fast forward to that. Let me see here. Let me just roll along in the presentation.
There was a smudge on the lens when I shot this video. I apologize. It's not as sharp as it should be, but you get the idea.
How do I get over there real quick? Oh,
Not that one. Here it is. All right.
Okay, show the balance.
Continue.
It's for some reason it's stalling a bit. Let me we'll show it. Maybe if I bring it on, this is within the presentation and I have it on the computer, so maybe it'll play a little better in that case. Yeah, why don't we cut back to the rest of the presentation and I'll bring it up.
Okay, we'll get back to it later.
Oh, yeah, that sounds
But I
good.
did describe how I apply it. Oh, here it is. No?
Yeah, it's safe. I'll look for the video on my computer and then we'll bring
Okay.
it up when I got it. Let's see here.
Go back to
Everywhere.
that file brush.
There you
This
go.
is a tool from another trade, which I've actually given presentations of tools from other trades for piano use. Some people like to sugarcoat the tips of hammers, especially in concert pianos when somebody wants a very soft pianissimo. So they'll just lightly needle the surface, the strike point. What I do that's a little quicker is use this file. This is a file cleaning brush, kind of file that you use for filing metal. It gets filled with bits of metal, and you use this kind of brush, a steel wire brush, to brush those filings out of a file. So this is available at Home Depot, made by the Nicholson File Company. And I brush this about a 45-degree angle across the grooves, and it helps redistribute the felt into the grooves, which gives it a softer pianissimo. And it lasts a while. It lasts a few months. So, okay. Sometimes, most of the time when I do the Ballestall voicing, it comes out completely even. Occasionally I have a few hammers that are particularly bright, so I'll give it has been called the angel shot. It was reported, I don't know, 5 years ago or so in the guild. And that's a needling under the strike point, for each string, one deep needling. We lost the picture. And that usually corrects that one loud note, probably because it had been voiced with lacquer at some other time.
I've got the video of the Ballestall application here, so
Okay.
we'll bring that up. Let's see here. That should do it.
Okay, show the Ballestall.
If you don't get anything else from this presentation, I hope it's this. It has a foaming agent added to it, which didn't used to be in it 5 or 6 years ago. So that's helps see where it's going. Two sections, then third and fourth section. And then repeat. Two sections, and then the third section, and you stop. Third pass, just 2 sections. And then the fourth pass over the bass. And that's it. And it should soak down almost to the core, to the wooden core of the hammer. And you want to play that Yamaha now? After the voicing?
Yeah, let me see. I think I've got that video pretty close by
wish
as well.
I should have taken it before. This is after.
Okay, let me get that going. Let me get a share on that.
And this was done with an iPhone, so it's a little brighter than it really is.
Okay, here we go.
David Gray, it is
Hey,
Yamaha.
Stanley.
Then voice with Ballisto.
Happy Saturday.
1 second. We got Carl Lieberman off mute here. Talking to Stanley. There you go.
Yeah, so
All right. All right, let's get back to it.
David Gray, it is Yamaha. Just been voiced with Ballisto.
By the way, David's 14 years old. He's pretty good. He's self-trained until rather recently. Anyway,
Oh, very nice.
that Yamaha was a gift, a cast off from a nursing home. And when I saw it, it was tremendously bright. And I think it sounds pretty decent now, but even better than it does sound in the video.
Couple questions. Let's see here. No long-term effects on the felt molding joint.
No, I've used it for at least 15 years. And I still have some of those pianos and they're fine.
Okay. And then Abby asks, do you have to wait any period of time for it to absorb?
You just heard him playing within a minute after I voiced it. So no, it will soak in further, and in some cases with super hard hammers on the next tuning, I'll give it a little more, but never more than that. And it should be fine. And on some super hard hammers, particularly in Kawais, I've literally saturated the hammer. And it finally came around when the hammer was totally saturated. So it had a nice range, but it took that much to get it there. So don't be afraid to use it. On a soft hammer, it's usually a couple of ounces is enough. Here's on some high-end pianos. After I do the Ballisto, I have found I experimented with David Anderson's technique that he described. One of the first piano tech radio hours. And that's to needle deeply all the way through the sides of the hammer. And I've done this with Sashiko embroidery needles, which are very long. You can find them in shops that sell embroidery materials. They're made in Japan. Very sharp, very thin. And I put them in. I find it's very hard to penetrate all the way through a hammer, even a soft pressed hammer. So I put them in a Dremel drill. And I've also experimented in the lower part with what's in the chuck with a very fine drill. In either case, it does give a little bit more bloom. With the needle, it takes a little longer because it's not actually drilled through, but and it does get hot. So with every penetration, I have a cup of water to cool the needle. But if you're interested in using David Anderson's technique, I like to call it the AAA method because it's for Anderson, and it's an A-shaped pattern of penetration. It's like the capital letter A. And you do for 3 strings, you do